The Forgiving Life is written as both a guide and a quiet companion for someone carrying resentment longer than they want to admit. Enright does not rush forgiveness or romanticize it. He treats it as a serious moral choice and a learnable skill, one that unfolds over time and reshapes the inner life. The book opens with a simple but disarming idea: forgiveness is not excusing, forgetting, or reconciling. It is a deliberate response to injustice that aims to heal the person who was hurt, not to erase what happened. Early in the book, Enright helps the reader name resentment honestly. He describes how anger often hardens into bitterness, sarcasm, emotional withdrawal, or constant mental replay of the offense. This stage is uncomfortable because it asks the reader to admit how much the wound still controls their thoughts, moods, and relationships. Enright insists that forgiveness cannot begin until the pain is fully acknowledged, because unacknowledged pain turns forgiveness into denial. The reader is invited to slow down and notice how resentment shows up in the body and in daily decisions. From there, the book reframes forgiveness as an act of strength rather than weakness. Enright challenges the common belief that forgiving lets the offender win. Instead, he shows how resentment keeps the injured person psychologically tied to the offender long after the event. Forgiveness, in this sense, is a way of reclaiming freedom. It shifts power away from the past and back into the present. This reframe is crucial because it removes moral pressure and replaces it with personal agency. Enright then introduces forgiveness as a moral virtue rooted in justice, not opposed to it. He emphasizes that forgiveness does not cancel accountability, consequences, or boundaries. A person can forgive and still seek legal justice, end a relationship, or protect themselves. This distinction allows forgiveness to coexist with self-respect. The reader begins to see forgiveness not as submission, but as an internal transformation that does not require external reconciliation. As the process deepens, Enright explores empathy in a careful, grounded way. He does not ask the reader to sympathize prematurely or excuse cruelty. Instead, he invites curiosity about the offender's humanity, not their behavior. This might involve recognizing that the offender is more than the worst thing they did, or that they too were shaped by wounds, fear, or ignorance. Empathy here is not emotional agreement, it is an expansion of perspective that softens rigid hatred. The book acknowledges resistance at this stage, and Enright treats that resistance with respect. He normalizes the fear that empathy will minimize the harm suffered. Rather than pushing past this fear, he encourages readers to move slowly, returning again and again to the truth of the injury. Forgiveness is presented as a layered process, where anger and compassion can coexist for a long time. This honesty gives the reader permission to proceed without guilt. Enright introduces the idea of offering goodness where none was given before. This does not mean returning to harmful situations or acting kindly toward an unsafe person. It means internally choosing to wish the offender moral good rather than harm. This shift, subtle at first, loosens the grip of revenge fantasies and chronic anger. The reader learns that forgiveness grows not through dramatic gestures, but through repeated inner choices. A powerful section of the book addresses grief. Enright explains that forgiveness often requires mourning what was lost: trust, innocence, time, or safety. Without grieving, forgiveness becomes shallow. He guides the reader to recognize that some losses cannot be restored, and that forgiveness does not guarantee emotional closure. Instead, it allows grief to move rather than stagnate. This framing makes forgiveness feel more emotionally honest and less idealized. As forgiveness matures, Enright shows how it begins to reshape identity. The injured person no longer defines themselves primarily by what was done to them. They become someone who has suffered and chosen a different response. This identity shift is subtle but profound. The reader may notice less rumination, more emotional space, and a growing sense of inner steadiness. Forgiveness becomes less about the offender and more about who the reader is becoming. The book also addresses self-forgiveness as an equally demanding process. Enright applies the same principles inward, especially for readers burdened by shame or regret. He distinguishes guilt, which can guide moral repair, from shame, which corrodes self-worth. Self-forgiveness involves taking responsibility without self-condemnation. This section resonates deeply for readers who realize they have been harsher with themselves than with anyone else. Enright integrates research throughout the narrative, but always in service of lived experience. He shares findings that link forgiveness with reduced anxiety, lower depression, and improved physical health. These insights are not presented as incentives, but as evidence that forgiveness aligns with human psychological well-being. The science reinforces the idea that forgiveness is not just morally admirable, but emotionally sustaining. Toward the later chapters, the book explores forgiveness as a way of life rather than a single event. Enright suggests that practicing forgiveness regularly builds emotional resilience, making future injuries less consuming. This does not mean becoming numb or tolerant of harm. It means developing the capacity to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. Forgiveness becomes part of character, not just crisis management. Enright is careful to address extreme injustice, including abuse and deep betrayal. He does not suggest that forgiveness is always immediate or even possible in the short term. Sometimes the most forgiving act is to prioritize safety and healing first. Forgiveness may come years later, or in partial form. This realism preserves the dignity of the reader's experience and prevents moral coercion. The final sections of the book return to meaning. Enright frames forgiveness as a contribution to a more humane world, beginning with the inner life of one person. By refusing to pass harm forward, the reader interrupts cycles of resentment and retaliation. Forgiveness, in this sense, becomes quietly radical. It does not deny evil, but it refuses to be shaped by it. By the end, the forgiving life leaves the reader with a sense that forgiveness is neither soft nor sentimental. It is demanding, slow, and deeply personal. It asks for courage, patience, and honesty. But it also offers something rare, the possibility of living without carrying the emotional weight of past wrongs. Not because the past no longer matters, but because it no longer defines the future.